So this is in your unit handbook. All of this is in your unit handbook, so you can have a look at that. I'm not sure yet actually whether we've got anyone enrolled in level 2. We're sort of restricted by word limits in terms of what we can ask people to do, and in level 2 we just didn't have enough words to fit in all of the immersion reports. So what I've done is, the way I've got around it is to say, write your 3 immersion reports and then choose your best 2 to submit. But I actually don't think anyone is actually enrolled in level 2, so I'll work that out with those who are at the time. So level 3, and I think you're all postgrads, aren't you, here? Is that right? Nicole, are you postgrad? Yeah. Yeah, postgrad diploma. Yeah.
Is Baden?
Sorry? Baden might be... Yeah, I'll talk to Baden. So 3 immersion reports. They're your reports in response to your visits. 1,500 words each. All of them together are worth 50% of your mark. Critical reading journal, 2,000 words, 25% of your mark. Integrative essay, 2,000 words, 25% of your mark. Those last 2, as I said, are due later in the semester, so that for 2 reasons. Firstly, you're building your knowledge of what you're doing and so on. And secondly, you will have received feedback from at least your first 2, from your first 2 immersion reports, hopefully.
So you've got dates for them yet?
No, I've only just, the child sites have only just become visible to me. I had to go chasing Brian to get the child sites. The child sites are where you'll find your assessments. Do you know about child sites? There's your meta site, which is the main one, and then I'll explain that perhaps later if you want me to. But all those dates will come up shortly, and when they come up, I'll alert you with an email that they're there, and you can go and look at them. That will all happen within the next.
Can I just ask a very quick question?
Yes.
On the 2,000 words? When we did 3,000 word essays, we needed 15 sources. What is it for the 2,000?
I've got down, if you scroll down, I've got my own little, well, not so little, assessment rubric here. Read this assessment rubric carefully. This is how I help myself to mark your work consistently, so that it's not just dependent on whether it's 10 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock in the morning and how bonhomie I'm feeling towards you all. Marking can be a bit subjective at times. So I use this, and I've got here bibliography, and I've got a guide that I try and stick to. I'm not going to penalise you if you're one this way or one that way, but this is the general guide. So 1,000 words, 5 entries, which seems like a lot, but it's actually not. 1,500 words, 7 entries. So I've asked for 7 bibliographical entries for your immersion reports. And they can be book chapters, journal articles, websites, reputable websites, not Wikipedia. It's all right to run your life by Wikipedia. It's not all right to submit your assessments by Wikipedia.
What if I edit a Wikipedia page to say this is applicable in any class involving multi-faith, and therefore I found it and it said on the website. Okay.
Nice work. Yeah, excellent. I like the way you're thinking.
No, okay.
Yeah, no. The only way you can use Wikipedia is by you can search a particular topic and then go to the bibliography used by the authors. And check those as reputable sources and use those sources. So it can be a good way of finding source material for yourself, but never ever use the body of the text, because Baden can just come along and tell you what he wants you to believe.
I can make every second word poop.
Yes, that's right. And you may be lucky, and there might be a little piece of advice saying this article probably needs some checking. But it's a flat rule that any bibliographical entry that simply references Wikipedia will be struck off. I mean, it's not recognised as valid.
I steal with my students the phrase I heard, it's an okay place to start, but not a good place to finish.
No, yes, so it's a good way of thinking about it. Yeah, yeah. So,
You're referencing.
yeah.
It's okay to start
Yeah.
there. No.
Yeah, and you might think that we're stating the bleeding obvious, but it happens every semester. So you just have to work that through. So, you know, I've got 2,000 words, 10 entries, 3,000 words, 14 entries, which is probably slightly less maybe than what's been. Yeah, at the lower end, I've probably got slightly more than what other people require. At the higher end, slightly less. What I'm actually looking for is not so much how many entries you have, but how you use them.
So you want us to do bibliography for the reflection report as well?
Yes, so every time you use external sources, you need to include full bibliographical information.
I just thought that like the reflection report was more our thoughts, but it's not.
Well, we'll get to that. We'll have a look at it in more detail. Most of it is, but there's a section there that is part of the theological reflection part where you can bring in your wider reading
Okay.
to inform the way you're reflecting there. So that's all in the handbook as well, so you'll be able to read that. Read that little thing I've got there about critical thinking. And I've got a little example there. One of the things we struggle with sometimes is thinking, how do I prove my thought or assertion? I know, I'll quote John 3:16. Now, I'm not dissing using sacred text. It's one of the sources for theological reflection, but we can't use it just as naive proof texting. We need to ask whether the text we're using is sufficient to enable us to think of our, as a premise for our idea or our conclusion, and what are the strengths and weaknesses of that text. Do some textual criticism, you know, and actually show that we understand the meaning of the text and how it illuminates what I'm arguing for. How it actually makes that a stronger argument. To simply say because it says it in the Bible is not a sufficient academic argument, even though it's really an attractive way to do it. And that's not to disrespect the Bible, that's actually to respect the Bible, to respect the text as a complex document, sacred document that we do the justice of reading carefully and applying carefully. So, yeah. So have a look at that stuff, and I've given you a website there on critical thinking to help you engage at that level. So, immersion reports. Each learning block requires you to visit a faith community that is other than your own religion or spirituality, and to write an immersion report that details your experience, your learning, and your critical reflection in response to that visit. Blah, blah, blah. 3 immersion reports. 3 steps in doing it. Make reflection notes on the same day as your visit to ensure that your experience is fresh in your memory. Remember, immediate felt experience is really, really important. 2, write a draft of your immersion report using what you've noticed during your visit. Submit the draft of your immersion report to the professional supervisor, Libby Shering, a minimum of 3 days before your supervision session. That's really important because if Libby's going to be able to supervise you well, she needs to come to that supervision session with a sense of what your learning goals are, how you want to approach that session. And she can't do that during the session. Because there's only, I think the supervision sessions are groups of 3, and we've allocated an hour and a half. So you kind of get, if all things are equal, you get about half an hour to share your own stuff and to work through your own stuff with Libby and your peers. So it's important that you go to those sessions prepared.
So how do we submit that to her?
There'll be a special portal that'll be there for her. Yeah, she'll have her own Turnitin portal that she'll go to those.
So with the draft, is there like a word, minimum word count for a draft?
A minimum word count for a draft? That's a good question. No, not really. But you've got to have enough in there to show that you've fulfilled at least you're partially on the way to fulfilling all of the criteria of that assessment, and we'll have a look at those now.
For another class, we did case studies to a similar thing. First, we would write a draft case study, then bring it to the class,
Mhm.
go through it, and then we would submit a week later
Yep.
the actual case study.
Yep.
For it, we aimed to get 90% of the word count, so that when the class would bring out things and say, you should really dive deeper on this, that, and that, it gave us a little bit of
It
leeway.
gives them, and Libby, you know, as much information as you can give for Libby, the better.
And then, of course, if you
for
don't need to add
classmates.
anything,
Yeah.
you're only 10% either way with the word count, so you're fine.
Right. Thanks, mate.
Also with the draft one that we have to submit to Libby, does that have to include our bibliography references?
Look, I recommend that you get it as close to finished as you can. That's not to say you might not have one or two things, you know, that you want to keep researching before you submit it. There won't be a huge amount of time available to you after the supervision to submit, because the submission date will correspond with the end of the learning block. So, and you'll be wanting to move quickly on to the next one. At the end of the second learning block, there's the non-teaching period, which gives you some space, but I'll recommend that you be working on your essay and your critical
And so,
reading.
if this is a reflection on our experience, what kind of things will we be introducing from other sources onto the
Yep, so the idea is that you start to integrate the reading that you receive, and you start to use your reading list as well. So you read stuff that's actually going to inform the way you engage in the encounter. So for example, the Encountering Religion reading that I've given you already, I don't know how many of you have read it, but the one that I refer to in that lecture that's up there now talks about 3 different ways of engagement. And you might say, well, in this experience, one of the things I wrestled with was whether I'm carrying some of my own confessional approach into the engagement and what I do with that. And you can then refer to that reading and say, you know, blah, blah, blah says the confessional approach is this and has these limitations, and I actually experienced that in the way I engaged. Do you know what I mean? So you're actually grounding your experience in broader research and understanding, so that it's not just I feel this, I feel that. And it's a tricky one in our course, because being a praxis process, experience is a primary source for what we do, but it's not the only source. We do want to bring it into conversation with our sacred texts, our traditions, and our reason. And part of reason and tradition is situating our experience within the broader conversation. Where does this fit? And what have other people had to say about what I've just experienced?
I would hope that we'd be able to bring in some of the sacred text reflection on the community revisit.
Absolutely.
As well as
Absolutely. Yep. So,
wrestle in some of that
Yep.
space.
yep. So in my research for going to the visit, I read some of the Quran, and, you know, and this is what stood out for me, and then this was clarified for me in conversation with so and so, and yeah, all of that is valid.
How are we referencing? Are we using, how is it Dravian,
The official, yeah, the university allows us to use APA. So if you want to use APA as counsellors, that's fine. Otherwise, you can use the standard Chicago style footnote referencing.
But we can use it.
You can use APA. I actually encourage APA, or some of the other in-text citation styles, because anyone who wants to study in this field and go on and do research and publish will be asked to publish using either APA or another in-text citation style, because that's the way pastoral and spiritual care journals do their thing.
Roll.
So, sorry?
That's the way they roll.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I personally don't like it because it just constantly interrupts the text. But you know, it's up. Yeah.
Sorry, I was on the phone, I may have missed it. You said earlier in the class that the word count was raised.
Oh yeah, it used to be. I think each.
And on here it says 1,000, you said 1.5 or something there.
Where does it say 1,000?
So for the immersion reports, it says 1,000 words each, 1,000 words each,
What
level 3. So,
That's a different, sorry, that's a different level. You're level 3?
yeah.
Yeah, so that's accurate for level 3.
Oh,
The-
okay.
The,
cool.
the
So
word
I'm
count was
easier
raised
than
for
everyone.
postgraduate.
Alright, cool.
Well, it's not necessarily easier.
It's hard.
It actually can be harder.
If you guys have ever had a class with Stephen Kirkpatrick, you'll know it gets harder. Have you guys had a class with him? There's one thing he does at the start of every year. He goes, write anything you want in 100 words. You do it, and he goes, all right, get it down to 50. And he goes, all right, get it down to 20. And he just keeps getting smaller, and you have to, and it's hard.
And that's essentially how you craft a thesis. Anyone who's doing a PhD or something like that goes through that exercise of minimising their words so that they crystallise their idea. It's reductionist on purpose, so that someone else has something to think about as well. All right. The immersion report is an essential part of the process of reflection for supervision, and very importantly, writing your essay. This will be part of your source material for writing your essay. You're required to complete one immersion report for each of the 3 faith community visits you complete. You must provide your immersion, blah, 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 we've already said that. Though it is called a report, your reflections must be written in the form of a journal, and I probably should put academic journal in there. The report must not be made in the form of a list. Perfunctory and unreflective elements of the report are useless to you and your supervisor and will not enable you to use the report as a source for your essay. Enjoy the process. Each immersion report has 1,500 word requirement, or 1,000 words if you're in level 3, and must be submitted by the due date in its corresponding learning block. Encountering a religious community that is other to your own is a profoundly challenging and rewarding event. This report challenges you to listen deeply to yourself through the encounter. It demands that you pay attention to your own emotions, feelings and thoughts as you encounter those who are other to you. Emotions are physiological and experienced physically. As such, they are usually pre-conscious and require considerable attention to be brought by you into conscious reflective awareness. Feelings are the conscious function of the brain articulating through language symbol the awareness of emotion. Thoughts are the product of the frontal cortex reflecting critically on experience. For example, I may be moved by emotional response to cry, feel that emotion as sadness or anger, and think about what my sadness or anger means for me and others. Must fulfill 3 basic criteria: enable the personal experience of people who follow a different religion and the experience or observation of their religion itself. Demonstrate your capacity to receive the hospitality of the other and to listen deeply to them. Learn at least 3 ways in which spiritual care can be helpfully and appropriately offered to people of that faith, religion, spirituality when in hospital, aged care, prison, school, etc. So that's a specific question that I'm asking you to ask people that you go and talk with. You know, when people find themselves in need of spiritual care in your religious tradition, what are some of the specific things that they might require? For example, in Islam, what used to be chapels, in hospital, what used to be chapels are now sacred spaces and provide for multiple religious expressions, including the need for Muslim people to pray in that space and so on. That's a fascinating question to engage in with people. Yeah.
Within the etc., are we able to consider like a counselling
Yep.
room, that sort of space that we might be being called to give
Yep.
spiritual care in?
And that's probably the critical question for those of you who are counsellors, is how do I employ spiritual care approaches
Yeah.
in my counselling practice? Are they compatible? Can you do them together? Do I have to change hats? What's going on in that sense? And as long as you have a good critical look at it, I'm not going to expect you to come up with one particular right or wrong answer. I just want a good, robust, critical discussion. I want to know that you're thinking about it and you're engaging in wider literature. So I probably should just leave you to read the bulk of that and just come down here to the format that I've got for you here. So this is kind of how I'm suggesting that you break it up. So preparation, record in journal format your emotions, feelings and thoughts as you initiate contact with the faith community, approach the encounter and arrive at the faith community. What do you think the origins of these movements in you are? How are they impacting your approach to the encounter? How are you responding to these movements in yourself in a way that will enable you to be present with attentiveness to the other? So this is preparatory. How am I going into this? Becoming aware. Record in journal format your emotions, feelings and thoughts as you engage in the encounter with the faith community and fulfil the 3 criteria of your visit. What do you think the origins of these movements are in you? How are they impacting your capacity to be present? Same sorts of questions. And here's where you record the information you have obtained in order to fulfil criteria number 3, which I restate for you here. Learn at least 3 ways in which spiritual care can be helpfully and appropriately offered. So those first 2 sections are profoundly reflective in that sense. So less critical academic input, more journal recounting of immediate felt sense. Critical theological reflection post-encounter. Drawing on your experience, questions, thoughts and wider reading, write a critical theological reflection that answers the following question. How will this encounter and the attendant experiences I have had in this encounter change the way I provide spiritual care to people of other religions and spiritual traditions? And the 4 sources of critical theological reflection that you must draw on are text, reason, tradition and experience. Now this is 500 words and you might be saying, hang on, 7 external sources in 500 words. You don't have to limit your external sources to this here. You know, you can still say, you know, when I went in, I was expecting to feel afraid and anxious, and I was just actually, to my surprise, experienced this incredible empathy with the people I was with. And you might say, and blah blah said in their understanding of the second approach to multi-faith engagement, that this empathic response is something that is really helpful in multi-faith, and that's what I experienced. Can you hear that? Mm-hmm. So you can bring external sources into journal personal listening as well. And that's it. Not much, is it? This is where we all start to have feelings of panic.
So in writing this up, just to verify that in my own head, how to format this, for each section, would I have like an intro, body, conclusion, or would I just have like an intro, then these kind of things in the body, and then a conclusion? Or no?
It's not an essay in that sense.
Yeah.
So I'm not expecting it to be structured in that sense of introduction, conclusion, although you may, in the interests of clarity, which is one of the key criteria in you know, the way I mark, structure, particularly that last one, that critical theological reflection in a writing style that's really, really clear. And that may involve some form of introduction of how you're approaching it and some form of statement of what you've concluded, even if your conclusions are a series of questions for yourself. One of the things that I do encounter often is that people settle for the questions, and don't get me wrong, I love the questions. That's actually where faith resides for me. But for example, where you might be tempted to say, oh, I had this experience, I wonder what this means about me. Does it mean this, or could it mean that? That's a really good process, but I would encourage you not to stop there. Have a go at answering your own questions. Have a go at understanding yourself. And even if you think it doesn't quite hit the mark, just say that. I suspect on these bases that it's probably this. This is why I say that. It requires further reflection. That's perfectly acceptable. If I can see that you're having a go at good, robust, critical reflection of your own experience, I'll be a very happy camper.
So you're happy for us to put it under those 3 headings?
Yep.
Rather than do just a
Yep.
full list?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Is that all right? You'll get into it. And you will have no shortage of material.
Mm.
These are rich experiences. Yeah. Critical reading journal. This is, I think, only 1,000 words, isn't it? Or 2,000 words for the... Yeah,
1,000 for me.
1,000 for you, mate. So good old Stephen's equipped you for that. 2,000 words for everyone else.
See, that one's oh, that's easy, critical reading, 1,000 words, I can do that. Now I'm like, I've only got 1,000 words for the immersion reports and I'm freaking out.
That's right. Use that extra 10%.
I will definitely use it.
So everyone knows that, do they? You can write 10% over or 10% under without being penalised. I've got that in the rubric.
Is like 11% okay?
You punished me last term.
Sorry, what was that? I didn't hear.
Is 11% okay?
From stock marks for 11%.
Really?
Yeah.
Damn it.
Did you
Because
count
I'm
the
seeing how far I
text
can push it.
referencing?
Then I was going to ask 12, then 13.
But the interesting thing is sometimes my word count will be one thing, and then when I turn it in, it's.
Yeah, because it includes
It
headings
includes
and
headings,
absolutely
yeah.
everything. So,
deep,
yeah.
The
Yeah.
best way of doing it is on words. On Word, if you're looking at this right now, down the bottom left corner, 4,907 words.
Yeah.
That's including everything.
Yeah.
That's probably your best number to go by, because that's how
You can,
what you call it will. pick it up.
you can have a look at it without that. So you can go into word count under review. And it comes up here. See, it's got this ticked, include footnotes and endnotes.
Yeah.
Can't turn that off.
Just untick that, and you get a sense of. But it'll default back to it, back to the other one on the page. But you can get a sense of how many words you've got. Now,
We're not using footnotes.
no. Well, you can use footnotes with APA, but you just don't put your bibliographical information in the footnotes. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah. Yeah. Now, I've had to make a difficult decision because traditionally I always said this, I exclude footnotes and various other appendages, but I'm out of step with the university on this. So in your own interest, I'm having to revert to the university policy, which is this includes everything, which is kind of annoying. But
Except
what?
the bibliography.
No, it doesn't include the bibliography, but it includes all footnotes and citations and headings and all of
But
that.
then we've got 500 extra words.
Sorry?
We've got 500 extra words, have we, than what we were going to do?
Oh yeah, now you have, yeah.
So
Yeah.
you could,
Yeah.
you could
Yeah.
rationalise it.
Yeah. What it does is, it forces you to use footnotes only when necessary, and not to write another essay in the footnotes. You know, because that's writing. You know, you read some articles and books and so on that are just half footnotes, and it's not a very clear way to write. You should be able to include everything you need to say in the body of the text. You might use you would use a footnote when there's something that you need to demonstrate that you are aware of, but that's outside the limits of this paper. And you can just say that. You can say, a question here was raised about the nature of intersubjectivity and how we think about that now when we're talking about personal boundaries and countertransference and so on. A full discussion on this is beyond the scope of this paper. However, if you want to read more about it, go and look at Pamela White's book, Shared Wisdom. There's a full discussion there. Great stuff. What that does is signal to me is that you're aware of the issue, that you're aware that it's important for the discussion but beyond the scope of the paper. Great. That's really the only reason you need a footnote. You don't need a footnote to explain, the doctrine of the Trinity, because it's important to you in that particular context. That's just beyond the scope and no need. It's kind of like, it was described to me as, when you're doing this, it's like here's your destination, here's your starting point, and you've got a route, and you've got all kinds of intersecting roads, go here. And you're going along here writing your essay, no worries, you come up to here and you go, oh, that looks interesting down there. I'd love to explore that road. I can't because I'm on the way to here. So what I'll do is I'll put in a signpost, a footnote to say, that's actually a really important discussion to be had. Can't have it now. Go and have it with them. We've got to go back here and keep going. Kind of get a sense of that's how we might use footnoting. Critical reading report, it's just easy. Choose one of the set readings and write a critical reflection about that reading. Your reflection must include a clear summary of the thesis, main idea of the reading in your view, a critical assessment of the thesis, i.e., are the premises of the thesis sufficient to assess the thesis as strong, not as true or untrue. As I rather controversially announced to a class the other night, nothing is true. What I mean by that is no thing, no idea, no argument holds the ultimate truth in and of itself. It must always be subject to critique. You can always go beyond it. That's the basic premises of critical academic thinking. So never sort of naively embrace an argument as completely true and right. You will always be able to, if you are thinking critically, find its limitations and name them. So, if the premise is strong, why? If not, why not? Citation of either 5, levels 2 and 3, or 10 postgraduate external sources, books, journals, articles, websites, not Wikipedia, that help you to explain your assessment of the thesis of the reading.
You want 10 over and above the reading.
Over and above the reading you've chosen. So in that sense, you're choosing one reading because if I was to say, give an overview of all of the reading you've done, it's like, how do I do that? I've only got 2,000 words. No, choose one and read it really, really well and ask yourself, how do the other readings inform my reading of this? How do they, how might they think differently to it? Do they offer a critical alternative? Do they agree with it? Support it? So on and so forth. Do they illuminate it in a way that, I might think, oh, I don't think anyone's actually thought of this, but when I read that thing over there, it made me think of this in a particular light. And so I'm going to, kind of like what I did with Damasio, and van der Kolk. It's like, how am I going to think about spirituality in this context? Oh, I've read this thing over here that might actually help me begin to form an understanding of this in a different way. That's how you can operate. A short analysis of how the reading has informed your understanding of spiritual care in a multi-faith context and how, if at all, you will integrate that information into your ongoing practice of spiritual care. Easy. Pretty straightforward academic exercise, actually.
How big are the readings that you put up?
Various.
Okay, so the big ones and small
Some of them are
ones.
long, some of them are short, and they'll pop up. You'll see them. I'm happy for you, actually, if you read something from your wider reading that really grabs you, that's not on this list or not in the set readings, talk to me. Say, hey, I've found this book and there's this great chapter in it and it's just had such a huge impact on me. I'd love to deal with it in this critical reading report. And if I think it's sufficient, it's not just a sort of, best-selling self-help book. It needs to have some critical academic weight. Then I'll be happy to talk about that with you. All this sounds a bit overwhelming at the start because you're getting all the information at once and it can feel like I have to do it all at once and it's like stress. But it just rolls out and you do it bit by bit. And talk to me, and talk to each other. 1 o'clock in the morning. Spread the anxiety. Integrative essay. and this is where an opportunity for you to sit down and bring together all the threads for yourself, which is why I call it an integrative essay. Basically, that means, what have I learnt and how will it impact my ongoing practice? So drawing from your 3 immersion reports that you'll write in reflection on your faith community visits and the 3 professional supervision sessions relating to each of your visits, write a critically reflective essay that focuses on one particular spiritual care issue that has been highlighted for you in the course of your faith community encounters. So as you're going through your visits, if something in particular jumps out at you as a really question that you really want to grapple with, it doesn't leave you alone. You can take it home with you. You lie awake thinking about it, which is usually a sign you need some supervision. But this is kind of a good critical question. Might be a good idea to say, I think I need to write about this in my essay because it'll help me understand my whole learning journey through this unit. Spiritual care issues may include the nature of spiritual care for a particular religion, spirituality in a particular context, such as hospitalisation, prison, school, aged care. And you might say, I was really caught by the way Muslims need to ritually wash themselves regularly, and the way that it was explained to me that Allah looks first upon the intention of the heart, and therefore if you don't have the right ritual washing things available to you in hospital, you can actually wipe the dust off the wall and wash yourself, and Allah will receive it as your purification. Wow. How often do you hear that in the media? Allah looks first on the intention of your heart. And that might grab you. And you might say, I was caught by the incredible compassion in Islam for the hospitalised in the fulfilment of their ritual requirements. And I want to talk about that and the way that's impacted my understanding of spiritual care. That would be a valid question. Maybe you might have come across some barriers to your own capacity to listen. So, for example, I find it hard to listen deeply because I have a deep-seated fear of idolatry. When I go into the presence of this person in the prison, they're wearing this voodoo thing around their neck all the time, and I just freak out, and I just can't focus, and I'm not present to them. What's that about in me? That might be a critical question. Or I find certain religious practices to be offensive, and I can't accept their religious concerns as valid. So that's a blockage to being present and listening. And we've talked all about that stuff today, haven't we? So you can dive into, and they're just by way of example. There can be other things that you raise, and if you're not sure, ask. Just ask, because there's a fair chance that if it's concerning you and you've got some good critical questions about it, I'm going to say go for it. The essay must include a description of the faith and spirituality in question, a description of the particular spiritual need, concern, and the context within which it is being addressed, a critical analysis of the potential interaction between the person receiving care and their faith spirituality. For example, how might the person in your care understand the role of their sacred text informing their response to a terminal diagnosis? Can you hear this one? You might go and sit with someone who is absolutely frozen, disabled in their own spirituality because of a particular interpretation of their own sacred text. And it's not your role to go in and say, but it doesn't even mean that. That's not your role. What might your role be in that situation?
Well, to help them unpack their own, their own faith. What is it about that that's stopping them from,
Yeah. So to create space for them to do their own work, and that can be that's about asking questions that invite people deeper into their own thinking and reflecting and reasoning. One practitioner tells a story of a man who couldn't bring himself to be discharged from hospital. And psychologists and social workers and everyone tried everything on him, couldn't budge him. The spiritual care practitioner went and sat and listened, and it turned out that he was deeply afraid of getting sick again when he got home and putting his family in a vulnerable situation. And so they unpacked the implied understanding of God in his view of the world. And in the unpacking of that, he realised that his thinking about his own God was limited, and that he hadn't attributed to God the kind of power to hold and to guide and to heal and to embrace anyone in any of those vulnerable situations. And when he realised his slight wrongness in his own thinking about his own faith and tradition, it released him. Oh, God's got me in this. God's got me and God's got my family. And that spiritual care practitioner had half of the ward staff knocking on her door saying, "What did you do?" She listened right in that moment. So you might, you're asked to identify ways that people's interaction with their own spirituality, their own religion, their own faith might impact the way they exercise their spirituality in any given situation.
So how does that relate back to the initial question of what's happening for us? So at the beginning of that question it talked about,
Yeah.
I find it hard to listen deeply, for instance.
Yeah.
And then it goes into focusing more on somebody, a specific example of a...
Yeah. It's really a criterion that's designed to make sure you include in your critical reflection not only the issue that you're finding to be the pinpoint of your reflection, but also to demonstrate that in the context of that topic that you've chosen, that you're listening to the issues that are arising for the other. So it's an interaction in that sense. A critically reflective analysis of the dynamics of listening in the multi-faith encounter. This should include a reflection on your own responses to encountering those who are different to you, how those responses impact your capacity to listen, and what you need to learn, develop in your own approach to listening to enable effective, safe and humane spiritual care. And again, that's within the context of the particular issue that you've chosen. Is that all right? Have another read of it. Email me, ask questions, or email Beth, ask questions. Do you know what the basic assessment grades are? There they are. Fail is less than 50%. You've got to work pretty hard to fail. Like honestly, if you put in an honest attempt to fulfil the criteria of your assessment, you're not going to fail. And if you get a pass between 50 and 64%, it doesn't mean you're a failure. It means you've got some stuff to work on. And as long as you're responsive to the comments and the feedback, you'll increase. I had one student came in, Introduction to Pastoral Spiritual Care, got I think a 55% in her first assessment, and I said, "Come and talk to me." She came and talked to me. I said, "There are 3 things you can do to fix this." Then 1, 2, 3. She went away. She fixed it. She came back. She got a high credit. A second assignment. She got a distinction in her third assignment. So the feedback's there for a reason. It's not to just criticise you or say you're hopeless. It's there to say, here are some of the gaps in what you've produced. Work on this stuff, and you'll just keep growing and improving and learning. In that sense. So credit 65 to 74. Credit is a good grade. That's nothing to sniff at. Distinction 75 to 84. High distinction 85 and above. Now these are just very kind of basic descriptions of what that means. this used to be all we'd get. This was the only rubric anyone would get. It's like, you know, and some lecturers would just, you know, put C at the end of you. Yeah. But we've all learnt, you know, we actually need to offer our students a bit more than that. And so we try and do our best to provide you with the kind of feedback you'll need to keep growing and learning and improving, and that's the best way to go about it. So I've got a principle that I try and get, at the very minimum, your first assessment task back to you with feedback before you submit your second assessment task, so that you've got something to work with. Subsequent ones may not be as timely as that, just depending on the particular workload that's going on in the semester, but at the very least that first one will be back to you with remarks that will help you to keep working and growing and expanding. Plagiarism is a no-no, and Turnitin will pick up similarities with other publications or with other assignments that you've submitted for other units. So don't just copy and paste stuff that you handed in an essay last semester, and just always cite your references, always put your direct quotes in quotation marks, and then even if Turnitin comes up with a similarity match on that quote, which it often will, if I can see that you've put it in quotation marks and you've cited it correctly, I just ignore it. Okay? Yeah. It's you get into trouble when you see something on a website, cut and paste it in, oh, that looks great, forget to cite it, and Turnitin says, well, Turnitin actually tells me that's from this website. And so then I have to come back to you and say, this is a direct quote, you need to do this in future, and if you respond to that and adjust the way you do it, then you'll be fine. If you don't, then I have to start penalising you, and if you persist, then I have to bring you in and talk to you about plagiarism. Bring you in handcuffs. It's pretty serious. The university are really serious about this stuff, because the academic credibility of the university, and in fact your skill as academics, is at stake. You don't want to end up out there doing a PhD and publishing journal articles and plagiarising left, right and centre without even realising you do it. So that's why we sort of jump on this really tightly early.
Also, pro tip is don't put Bible stories in and Bible verses, because you can do this probably. I once put in quite a few verses of something,
Yeah.
and even though it was cited properly, it still gives you a percentage after you submit an assignment, and it'll just go 50% plagiarist or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And
So
just set it up, so you might as well just put in the Matthew 3:15 or whatever and leave it at that and move on, kind of thing.
yeah, but I mean, once again, you know, if I can see that it's
Yeah.
quoted correctly, it's within quotation marks and it's cited correctly, no matter what your Turnitin score is, I'm going to disregard that, because Turnitin breaks it down for me. It tells me this percentage was from websites, this percentage was from journal articles, this percentage was from previously submitted papers, it goes through the whole thing. So if I can see that you've got 15% Turnitin similarity report with Bible verses, and they're all quoted correctly in quotation marks and cited correctly, that 15% gets disregarded. Having said that, it's always better to write your own words than rely on large slabs of quotes. If you rely on large slabs of quotes, you're going to get a little note from me saying, where is your voice? This is not you writing. This is you delivering up someone else's writing for me to read. I can go and find that for myself. I want to know what you have to say about this. And that's why citing your ideas that you derive from other people is also important. So you might not quote them. For example, I might say, you know, Paul Tillich calls faith ultimate concern. And I might put that in quotation marks, and then I'll put my little APA here, Tillich, you know, date 1956. It's up to you whether you do page number or not. And I haven't actually directly quoted him. I've used a core idea of his, but I've still cited him because I'm deriving my thinking from his work. And so I owe him recognition for that. And that's a good way, actually, to up your bibliographical content without having to write screeds on a particular source. You can say, there are two key ideas that come from this source that influence my thinking. They are this and this. Bang, citation. There you go. Okay? But once again, I say that in the same breath as saying, don't just use your external sources as proof texts. Actually engage in them. Critique their influence on you. There we go. Do you all know how to use Turnitin? Yep, good. So I'll have the Turnitin portals up in the next week or so, and I'll send out a note to tell you when they're all up there, and you just go to the child site, which is the site attached to your particular enrolment level. There's your citation style. You can just go, you can just go straight to APA. You don't have to use the Chicago one that I've got here. Yeah, once again, read the assessment rubric really, really carefully. 50% is sort of general comprehension, spiritual insight, use of sources, reason, text, tradition, context, and evidence that you're developing in your understanding. Critical thinking. This is the one that most people struggle with, including demonstrating in your writing that you are thinking critically. And I'm often highlighting areas in here. For example, dialogical insight. What's dialogical insight, Chris? Well, here it is. Demonstrates the capacity to identify a thesis in relation to its antithesis. So this is what is said. This is what disagrees with what is said. And the capacity to work towards the synthesis. So how do we, neither one holds all the truth. How do we move beyond both of these positions to form a new understanding? Secondly, demonstrates an awareness of the yes and the no inherent in every statement, argument, belief and form, which is basically your awareness of what I said earlier. Nothing is true. Nothing is ultimately true in and of itself. There is always a yes. You can say, yep, I hear this is good, this is strong in this argument, but it has some limitations and we can move beyond it because we're aware of what Joe Bloggs over here says, or Miss Henson over here says in their critical research, and that gives us a handle on something else that we can add to the picture. 3, does not uncritically allow a dogmatic belief to predetermine the conclusion of the assessment. And this is basically religious assumptions uncritically used as a premise for an argument. Do you know what I mean by that? I don't mind you bringing your religious beliefs, your tradition, into the critical conversation. But you owe it the honour, you owe your traditions the honour of rigorous critical examination, not just uncritical, naive assumption. To use a controversial one, marriage is always between a man and a woman because in Romans 12, blah, 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 it says this. Okay, that's a particular dogmatic belief that you bring on the basis of your tradition, your religion, and so on. And you may bring it, but you need to show how you've critically assessed it. Not just naively assumed that that's what's true, therefore it trumps all the critical thinking that you're doing. Do you get where I'm going with that? The reason I'm explaining all of this and sort of laboriously outlining it is because in my experience so far in teaching this stuff, this is a learning edge for most of us as students. We've got to constantly apply ourselves to this. It requires us to think hard, and that's what university is. It's hard thinking. Good question.
Given word counts.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
at all along the lines of saying, whilst not all Christian expressions would maintain the view that marriage, blah, 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 so and so and so and so understand Romans, whatever, to be, and I hold to that view, and therefore that sits behind my sense of.
Yep.
So something that's nuanced,
Yeah.
rather than making a blanket statement, this
Yeah.
is true.
Yeah.
because
Romans
that-
12 says this, therefore this.
Yeah. So an acknowledgement that not all people in all denomination expressions would understand that.
Yeah.
But I just really don't have time to go and
Yeah.
run down that little rabbit hole right now. But
Yeah.
I've at least put it up there and said, I get that.
Yeah, and even better, you know, wherever you're tempted to say, many people think such and such, well, as your reader, I've got no idea whether you're right or not. So many people think such and such. For example, you know, Joe Bloggs and Mary Lee think this. However, blah 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 and blah 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 think this, and on this basis, I'm persuaded more by this argument than I am by that argument, and in my hypothesis or my thesis, I'm going to apply this for these reasons. And you can actually say that in 50 words or less. You don't have to write screeds on that stuff. You can, as Baden just reminded us, condense that. Words are like gold. Every single word counts. Value every one for its meaning, and don't waste words. And that can be a great way. Can be to write your draft, and then come back to it in a week's time. And go, what can I cut? I just cut down an 18,000 word paper to a 5,000 word paper. It was brutal. It was like ripping my heart out because it was stuff that I'd worked over. But boy, is it a good exercise to really value each word and hone what you're saying to a really clear message. You'll get good at it if you're not already. I'm sure you are already. I reckon we're done. Are there any last minute, questions that